Hello, my Richies, and welcome back to another episode of the Make Life Rich Movement podcast. My name is Sarah. I'm your host. And in today's episode, we are discussing the synchronicity of science and spirituality. There is a lot to be said about those moments where you know that it's something more than a coincidence, but don't have the proof to really prove exactly what it was. And those are some of my favorite moments in life. If you're new to the show, I am a huge fan of talking about quantum physics, neuroscience, our habits, our personalities, our healing, and now God. And today we're combining all of those things into one episode. So we are definitely going to talk about the ways in which your faith journey, spirituality, self growth, and seemingly science all coincide to be able to give you these beautiful moments of synchronicity and spirituality. Now, for me, it was really important to kind of explore what I thought synchronicity was. Like, it isn't this like mystical coincidence that, one could use to say like manifesting works out of ourselves, right? But in time, I have come to learn that our universe is so interconnected and that involves every teeny tiny little part of our brain. And God responds to all of our needs, desires, and wants with just divine love via our consciousness. And in some really beautiful ways, our brain and all of the pathways in it work together with God to bring us everything we've ever desired. And it's kind of something I'm still unpacking a lot off of in combining so many things that I've been learning about for years and now finally adding the secret sauce of a faith journey and getting to know God on top of it. Got some crazy concepts here, guys. So take this episode with a grain of salt, right? Because I am just talking about what I feel and what I feel like reality is kind of framing into for me. And if this resonates with you, then awesome. If not, I appreciate your time and attention. So for me, I had to start by understanding that synchronicity is divine communication. After my father passed away 6 years ago, this past May 15th, there were just so many crazy signs. And in the very beginning, it started with a sunset on that exact day that he passed. And the sunset had a cloud that went over it, and the cloud was in like a little bit of a shape of a face, and it had two holes for eyes and then a smile for a mouth, and the sun shone through the clouds. And my mom and I saw it on the third floor of our deck, like looking out at the bay. And that was one of those first moments where I was like, my heart, my soul, my brain, all in one moment registered, that's my dad. And that's how it started. And those moments, at that point, I knew that God existed, and I just had not begun my journey with him in a contextual, on a first name basis manner. A few days before my dad passed away, he had an interaction with Jesus that I have shared loosely before, but we'll certainly get into because it's absolutely a part of my journey and my testimony to now being a follower of Jesus and a big believer in the power of that divine love. And it was moments like that, the synchronicities just felt so meaningful. They served almost as a form of what felt like divine dialogue between me and my dad at the time. I remember walking through the city after I'd gone back to Philadelphia a week after he'd passed and walking through my favorite path where I come across many different trees, shrubs, rose bushes, etc. And I remember looking at a leaf. It's so funny to say. I remember looking at a leaf and going, Dad, you're in a leaf right now. I could feel him, his soul, his essence was in a leaf in front of me, and the leaf stole my attention on my walk, and I literally stopped and stared at it and took it in and its movements and what it was doing, its edges, its color. And in that moment, I knew my dad was in the leaf, and he wanted me to stop and say hello to him via the leaf. It makes me cry now because it was such a poignant moment. And since then, I've had a lot of moments like that with God, where I've asked for God to show himself to me, and he has. And the feeling then in receiving that, asking from God, was the same as the moment where I realized my dad was in a leaf, and it clicked for me. I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. okay, the inner inklings of our intuition come from God. I know that now. Consciousness comes from God. I know that now. But being able to utilize my consciousness and my neural pathways to kind of recognize the patterns through which God speaks, the timing, and the seemingly unrelated events that truly carry such spiritual significance for me made me feel like I needed to have this episode. Now, I wonder if you've ever had a moment that ranks a truth so pure and strong to you that you were like, my God, I have no other reason but to think that it is this, because I can feel it. Like just the way in which I want to say, like, you can feel the tether of your soul. It's a meaningful coincidence. It's not just a random thing that's like, that's fun. Like moving beyond random coincidence to a sacred connection was where I began to recognize, like, pay attention. God's talking to you right now, like literally. But from a spiritual perspective, I started to look at these moments as present divine love. If I were willing to look them in the face as a mode of communication and utilize it as a way to interact with God in the physical world, I started seeing repeating numbers, seeing the same messages over and over again, noticing the same birds on my path when I'm walking, experiencing perfect timing, witnessing spiritual intelligence just operating through natural law, whether that's seeing birds hover in like a wind bluff, or seeing the perfect white neon cloud in a blue sky over a green field and knowing that God made that, or feeling proud of yourself and getting like head to toe goosebumps because you know that you are protected. These things are not a coincidence. They are the absolute like essence of the world and the universe coursing through your veins, and it is done so with God. Now, for me, I had a particular language of synchronicity that kept popping up for me in the beginning. And certainly, I think when my father's early days after his passing, he wanted me to know loud and clear that it was him over and over and over again. And he came to me a lot in scenes of nature, whether it was a beautiful sunset or, like I said, a cool set of clouds over like my favorite colors, blue sky, green marsh, or, maybe I was in the city and it was just the most perfect rose, or, like I said, the leaf. There were even moments where I just recall walking down 20th and Walnut and turning onto Rittenhouse Square and walking through the park and feeling the energy of the people in it. Hearing the music being played by a live band sitting in the middle of the park, the laughter of children dancing around, dogs chasing balls, people sharing beverages and dinner, me knowing I was walking home to the love of my life, and just feeling the perfectness of that moment. And knowing that was a moment my father would have registered and seen as perfect as well was also him connecting with me. So you have to find your personal synchronicity language. There's going to be so many ways. Maybe it's through song lyrics, animal encounters, passages in the Bible that you read, books falling open to an exact page and it strikes you, conversations that are answers to your prayers. Learning your personal sign helps you to really tap into and recognize that divine communication more readily so that you can always be available for it and always be able to engage and truly take the full momentum of that love that's being injected into your life via that encounter. Now, there was for me a reckoning of, the difference between wishful thinking and a divine encounter. And I needed it to be an authentic spiritual sign. It was all well and good if I was like, "Oh, make the light turn green in the next 3 seconds and blah blah blah." We're not playing, like, we're not at the roulette table. We're not gambling here, right? We're asking for God to come to us. And there has to be a quality of recognition. There has to be a feeling of like, this was meant for me. This message was meant for me. This feeling I'm receiving right now was meant for me, that goes beyond coincidence. And they often come when you're not actively seeking these signs, but rather living in alignment with spiritual principles. You're going to have these things pop up for you when you're maybe just after a really good cry and you're feeling better all of a sudden. And then you walk and you see a sign and you're like, ah, everything's going to be great. This kind of helps you to distinguish between whether it's divine, genuine divine communication, or if it's projection from what can be a desperate state, you find yourself in with pattern seeking recognition that's just kind of giving you that out. When in reality, it might just be a scenario where the signs are just around the corner and you have to endure and live through your experience of discomfort a little bit longer. Now, when I originally mentioned we'd be discussing quantum physics, I will tell you, I don't have any kind of physics degree, no science degree here. I just understand the way in which my motherboard interacts with the ultimate Ethernet that is God. So, what's the core concept here? Modern quantum physics reveals that there are scientific principles that align remarkably with ancient spiritual teachings about the interconnected nature of reality and consciousness's role in shaping our lived experience. So what does that mean? We are constantly within a quantum entanglement and web of divine creation that ultimately God is in charge of. And scientists have been able to prove that there are particles that seem to be entangled and they are instantly affecting each other regardless of distance. So, this kind of mirrors our spiritual teachings that all creation is interconnected through the divine love of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Now, when you're praying for someone or you're sending loving thoughts or feelings, or you feel drawn to call a friend that needs you, you may be experiencing this quantum interconnectedness in action. And quite frankly, this to me is the absolute way in which we're receiving and being a conduit of signs for God with others. Now, the observer effect and the consciousness that is creating our reality are two separate things. Quantum experiments show that the act of observation is separate, but literally changes the behavior of subatomic particles that are individually existing. So, this suggests that consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping our physical reality, which aligns with spiritual principles about faith, our intentions, and how our inner world influences our external experiences, not only for ourselves, but with others. Again, that interconnectedness of us all being one, God being the ultimate orchestrator, and the ways in which we interact with each other to be physical signs delivered by God within your realm of reality that are helping you to ultimately get closer to God through this sign, this ultimate connection between consciousness and the quantum reality of our brain matter and our consciousness and our soul and our heart and all these things that are still yet to be proven. This seems to be the way in which this physically, scientifically is happening, or one could assume it's happening. So, your spiritual state is not as separate as we thought it was from our physical reality, and they are absolutely intimately connected. There are going to be, how do I frame this? There are fields in which we can find ourselves when we are in a room with others that we are connected with. And that coherence field and the power of an aligned intention. So let's say maybe you're at church or you're at a family dinner and everyone's in great spirits. Research shows that in those moments when groups of people are either meditating together, praying together, playing together, loving together, or focusing on the same intention, they are creating measurable, let me say it again, measurable, proven electromagnetic fields that can influence their environment. So if we are giving out our own electromagnetic field and everyone in the room is vibing together, our electromagnetic fields of influence are going to overlap. And in the overlapping, we are literally connected as one. This is how husband and wife become one. These consciousness fields, these interconnected ways in which our consciousness, our heart, and our soul intertwine happen in these electromagnetic fields that are absolutely able to be measured and have been proven to be real. Now, this can help to prove with scientific backing the spiritual practice of prayer, meditation groups, and why being in a spiritually aligned community can amplify your personal growth and your abilities to deepen your relationship with God and all of the synchronicities in your life with prayer. So, one thing that I came to notice along my own journey of trying to get closer to God were some of my lingering, larger inner child healings that were inner child wounds that had not yet been healed that were acting as a block between my synchronicity recognition and it happening to me. Now, childhood wounds around trust, worthiness, and spiritual safety can create internal barriers that make it difficult to recognize or, be able to receive that divine communication through synchronicity. And oftentimes for me, early in my life, before I started my inner child healing around 2010, there were moments of just pure doubt and negativity that I allowed to absolutely ooze over onto everything. Nothing was possible. Everything was terrible. Nothing was ever going to be good. I would have never allowed my brain for a single second to interpret anything happening to me as a sign or as good or bad. It just would have been inconsequential, like, oh, that's silly. Get it out of here. Like, my life sucks. I don't have time for games. Now, at the core of that for me was the fact that I needed to address my lack of mentality. I had no self-worth. I had no self-love. I internally believed I was not special enough to receive signs. I was not special enough to be in synchronicity with God. And many people dismiss synchronicities because their inner child believes that they too are not important enough for divine attention. And often this wound stems from childhood and experiences of simply being overlooked or told their spiritual experiences were not real. Healing involves recognizing that divine love is intimately personal and infinitely personal, and that you are absolutely worthy of this direct spiritual connection that only you can have with Jesus, that only you can have with God. Only you can know your true relationship with our creator. And that is something that you have to allow yourself to be open to receiving and open to seeing these initial steps and this initial beginning of the conversation with God with these steps of synchronicity. Now, I myself had somewhat of inherited religious, organized religion traumas, and they were absolutely blocking me for even for a single second accepting that there was any kind Lord and Savior that was going to not only make my life better, but protect me and like ultimately love me so much. My parents both had extreme religious organizational trauma from their childhoods. They grew up in the 50s. It was an absolutely wild time back then. And they thought that by keeping us from the church and ultimately from the Bible, that they were saving us from the things that had happened to them. And they were doing their best and they did the best they could. And I wish that I would have come to Jesus a lot earlier in life instead of at 40. However, I'm so thankful and I feel extremely blessed for all of the work and all the experiences and all of the life that was lived in those 39 years that have now given me the absolute catapulting mountain high platform for me to begin building my relationship with God upon and understanding and having life experience in order to really just be so grateful and thankful and appreciative of this new relationship with God. But if you grew up with and find yourself having religious trauma, it is absolutely blocking your ability to receive any kind of spiritual signs. And if you grew up with rigid religious teachings that discouraged that direct spiritual experience, or they claim that only a certain person or group of people could receive divine guidance, your nervous system may have automatically shut down the neurological synchronistic awareness that we have in our brain, and it could have been labeled dangerous or wrong to where you do ultimately avoid it at all costs. And healing this trauma is going to allow you to reclaim that birthright of direct divine relationship with our Lord, and replace the notion and the narrative that you need someone to give you that conduit to God. There is no other conduit to God than Jesus. You go to Jesus to get access to God. You go to Jesus to get access to the Holy Spirit. And there is so much to be said about just being able to go to Jesus and give it up to him and know that he's going to have that conversation with God on your behalf. And this is still something I'm getting to know the hierarchy of and the relationship of that triad. But you deserve to have this relationship with Jesus. You deserve to feel that God flows through you and you are interconnected with the entire oneness that is existence. And I hope that you do that work for yourself. I have a number of guided visualizations to help you with inner child trauma as well as reparenting. They are not specific to religious trauma that may come in the future, but I do encourage you deeply to give it a look. I myself am still needing to clean out some cobwebs in that department for myself, which is why I say I may just record one and put it up for you guys. But I made fun of people that believe Jesus and said they love Jesus. I'm like, you love a white dude in the sky? Or you think a white dude in the sky is going to solve your problems? Like, oh my gosh, I could slap that girl now. The incredulousness. It's like telling everyone you hated a movie that you never watched. I never read the Bible. I never took one single iota of impetus to look in any different direction other than a negative one about God, because I had such disdain for God in the way in which I had envisioned that he had quote unquote punished my father with his 27-year incredible, crazy illness with cancer over my lifetime. But now I know and I think so differently about my dad's life and about God and why he gave my father the life he gave him, and subsequently why it gave me the life that I have. And I'm thankful now. I also needed to release the need to prove or convince others of my spiritual experiences. There were certainly people within my life very soon after my father passed, and I would go to them with just like sheer awe and wonderment over the things I was experiencing, and they would poo poo on it so hard that it really did take the wind out of my sails for a minute and made me start to question and doubt. And, my husband was so kind in this moment of just being like, F those people. It's not for them, it's for you. And that was so important for me to hear because it made it feel even more special. It was just for me, it wasn't for them. So, your inner child who was shamed for sharing any kind of insights or emotional intelligence or feelings of overall love, or, oh, what do you think you know? You're just a kid. Those synchronicities that you hid completely or you became defensive about their validity with others, your maturity now is going to give you the ability to not only treasure these experiences privately, maintaining your own spiritual knowledge regardless of other skepticisms or lack of understanding for what you're experiencing or what you're going through, because no one is going to know what your relationship with God looks like. And it's that adage, if you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. A lot of people can see you going through a change, but are still not in a space where they're able to even accept for a second it could be real, because you're moving further away from them in this growth. And if they're not going to come and meet you, and they know for a fact they're not ready to seek that reality, then they're going to poo-poo you and put you at a distance so that they themselves don't feel internally judged or project any of that inwardly to themselves to then feel less than because they're not prepared for or ready for the journey of growth that you're going on. Really be mindful of who you share your spiritual experiences with, but ultimately know that you don't need the acceptance or proof of anyone but God. And you've already been given that because they're giving you all of the spiritual synchronicities. Now, eventually, I came to recognize about a year or so after my father's passing that I could absolutely cultivate an inner, we'll say, set of conditions for this synchronicity to really flourish and flow to me. And, these synchronicities were gifts of grace. And gosh, there were certain times where certain spiritual practices and state of consciousness made me way more receptive to these beautiful messages and synchronicities. And the receiving of divine communication felt extremely meaningful within these moments that I had begin to cultivate. So, I first had to make sure that I was always living in a moment of presence rather than mental projection of the future and anxiety. And synchronicities often occur in the present moment when you are just in the flow, loving life. But, anxiety and, mental racing of thoughts or preoccupation of your thoughts can cause you to absolutely miss these synchronicities entirely. And that was a good majority of my life. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, prayer, guided visualization, gratitude work. These things can help you stay present enough to notice these divine communications happening around you more and more frequently over time. And when your attention is scattered between past regrets and future worries, you absolutely miss the sacred conversations that are happening for you right now. Even today, I bet you could notice some type of divine synchronicity happening in your life. And if and when you do today, just give thanks up to God and get a little smile on your face and move through the day knowing that there is so much more of that where it came from if you are ready to look for it. Now, certainly alongside of that, you have to maintain an attitude of that wonder and that expectancy. And I began to approach life with the spiritual curiosity of a child 5 months ago when I cracked open that Bible and I started listening to the Hallow app to get a better understanding of God, the history of it all, and where I fit into it. Now, a child that believes in magic, and, if we want to think about a kid and their ability to believe in watching a magic show happening, from a quantum perspective, a child living in curiosity is an individual that lives in a universe that is far more mysterious and interconnected than the purely materialistic thinking that we are programmed to have would suggest. And this doesn't mean that you can be gullible, or it's preferred that you be gullible in order to receive these divine messages, but rather maintaining an openness to the surprise of the communication from this higher power through unexpected channels that are going to pop up throughout your day. Now, I also got into the habit of just practicing surrender for so many different reasons. Not only when I'm in the flow, also when I'm in fear and anxiety moments, periods of failure, just everywhere, all over the map. And I noticed that in surrendering, synchronicity began to emerge when I released that control and when I trusted that the divine love that's orchestrating my life through God is always going to be aligned with perfect timing. And me having that tight grip and trying to force the outcomes of my reality was actually blocking the natural flow of what God had in mind for me. And there's that adage of, like, I've said this before in a past episode, like the little girl saying she wants like pony. And then God's like, but wait, I have so much more for you. And it's like a whole circus. Like she gets all the circus animals. Seen it also with flowers. Like she picks the one flower and he's like, wait. I wanted you to pick this one because it's a bouquet. But in giving up what I thought I wanted and allowing it to just come to me in the nature that it's supposed to, I not only learned how to hold steadfast to my belief and allow hope to really like soar out there, but it really opened my hands up to create a space for the divine intelligence that is God to respond in ways that were beyond my imagination. And every day is a new day of not only like God's mercies, but just the sheer, unbelievable, impressive works that God puts throughout every moment of your day. And when you start paying attention, you're going to be literally shocked at how interconnected, magical, and full of love life can be when that is what you're focusing on. Now, I needed to give myself the ability to integrate synchronistic guidance into my daily decision making, because eventually I got to a place to where all I was seeing were the signs around me. Synchronicity was everywhere. And in that ultimate purpose of recognizing that synchronicity isn't entertainment, but it's transformation. Yes, it is entertaining. It is like, oh, exciting when it happens. You're like, oh my goodness. But it is supposed to be used for transformation and not for entertainment. It isn't a show, right? It's a guidebook. And in allowing divine communications to kind of guide our choices and deepen our relationships with that ultimate truth, we are ultimately creating a synchronicity practice that gives us the ability to tap in and tap out of this connection a lot more quickly. Now, for some people, you may want to enter into a space where you are journaling your synchronicities. That was fun for me in the beginning, especially after my father passed. I really enjoyed being able to look back and be reminded, especially in those absolute woeful moments of just terrible, awful grief. And I began documenting what I felt like were meaningful interactions, signs, synchronicities, unexpected counters, repeat messages, things that kept popping up. And then over time, I got to see how patterns were emerging, and it ultimately revealed what was a path of God leading me towards what I absolutely would have missed in the moment if I had not kind of coerced and trained my brain via using the same neural pathways over and over again with intention and purpose of getting into that flow state. They would have missed me so completely. It was really important for me to be writing these things down in the beginning, especially because of the state of my brain and the grief and just everything that was also something I was dealing with and working through. When I was able to kind of get this overall picture of what the spiritual communication of these signs was looking like with God, I was able to balance the guidance with practical wisdom. Now, while these synchronicities are just a beautiful confirmation and an absolute direction to go in. They work best when they are combined with discerned action, moments of prayer, moments of reflection, and then maybe tapping in someone you trust. Maybe it's your husband, maybe it's your parent, maybe it's a coworker you really love the way their brain works. Kind of bounce off of them and get a little bit of their own discernment in understanding whether or not that divine communication through synchronicity supports what you're doing rather than kind of using it as a way of completely replacing your decision making model. We still need to be in charge of our life here in the now, right? But God is always going to send us those little messages along the way that if we take them and we integrate them into what we're currently intently working on with ourselves, that's where the miracles can truly start to pop off in every direction you never expected. Now, I find it really fun to kind of call to attention the beautiful signs of synchronicity happening for others in my life, especially those that tend to be a little pessimistic or negative or have zero connection with God. And I also like to think of it as a way of giving back to the person that helped me to look on the sunnier side of things. I now consider myself an absolute optimist. There is no obstacle that I cannot overcome. Everything is possible, everything is figure outable. Helping others to recognize that divine communication in their own lives is an absolute blessing and gift that you can give others immediately starting today. And as you become more fluent in your language of synchronicity and what that looks like for you, you can help others to notice within themselves these moments of synchronicity and that divine communication happening without imposing your own personal spiritual beliefs or faith-based beliefs on them and the vocabulary that can come with that throughout our faith journey, right? Like a few months ago I wasn't comfortable talking about Jesus and not even really God, and here I am now. I've probably said each of their names 50 times. So, this might involve you asking questions like, have you noticed any interesting patterns lately? Or what keeps showing up in your life that feels significant? Rather than telling them what these things mean. It is all about their interpretation. That is also where their rewiring in the brain comes from. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. It's important that we show these signs to them a few times over and over to give them the ability to first see them so that neurologically their brain can begin to rewire to hunt for those things in their life, which ultimately then leads you to be a conduit for God to be able to send them these synchronicities because you've helped them to identify them enough for their quantum physics and the neural pathways in their brain to connect within this magnetic field that we all have, enough for God to get down and do the heavy lifting for you. It is so crazy. It is so beautiful. I'm so thankful for all of these things coming together for me in this manner. I hope they resonate for you. I hope this episode has you amped to be seeing for what signs and synchronicities are coming into your life today. And I would absolutely love if you would share them with me. You can do so via the comments on Spotify or via the comment section on YouTube. My Richies, thank you so much for being on this journey with me. I know I've taken a bit of a left turn here, but in reality, I've always been discussing these topics and these patterns. The nomenclature has changed. And I hope, at the very least, if you're not comfortable with utilizing and accepting the names of God and Jesus, that you can still take these underlying messages because they are so full of just goodness and all of the absolute instructions that are needed for a healthy, happy life that we can be proud of, full of purpose and passion and love grounded in faith and hope. My Richies, it is an absolute pleasure to have your time and attention. And as always, make life rich.